Imagine this. You come home from a short trip, tired but glad to be back, only to find someone else living in your house. Your furniture, gone. Your pictures, gone. Even your dog's bed is missing. And the person inside your house. They claim they bought it fair and square. That's exactly what happened to my sister. And the person behind this insane mess. A woman named Karen. Not just any Karen. She was the head of the HOA. You'd think someone in that position would be fair, right? Nope. She used her role to do something so outrageous, it still makes my blood boil. Now, my sister isn't the kind of person who picks fights or causes problems. She moved into her home 3 years ago. Quiet neighborhood. Friendly neighbors. Everything seemed perfect at first. But what she didn't know was that the HOA was run like a mini dictatorship, and Karen was the queen. From the very beginning, Karen had her eyes on my sister. First, it was small things, your grass is a little too long, or your trash can was out past 10 a.m. on pickup day. Petty stuff. But then it got worse. Karen started sending official-looking warnings. Fines for things that weren't even violations. Like, one time my sister got fined because the color of her blinds didn't match the neighborhood aesthetic. Blinds. Inside the house. Who even checks for that? My sister paid a couple of the fines at first, just to avoid drama. But it didn't stop. It seemed like every week there was a new complaint. My sister started to feel like she was being watched. She even caught Karen taking photos of her backyard through the fence. It was creepy. Things took a turn when my sister had to leave town for a few weeks to take care of our sick mother. She asked me to check in on her house now and then, just to make sure everything was okay. So I did. First week, everything fine. Second week, still fine. But in the third week, I pulled up to her driveway and saw something that stopped me cold. There was a moving truck in front of her house. And people, strangers, were carrying furniture inside. My first thought was that I had the wrong house. But then I saw the porch. The wreath my sister made was gone. Her flower pots were gone. Even the welcome mat had been replaced. I walked up to the front door and knocked. A man opened it and looked surprised to see me. I asked what was going on. He told me, "We just bought this place through a quick HOA auction. Great deal." My heart dropped. I called my sister immediately. She thought I was joking. "What do you mean sold? That's not possible. I never put my house up for sale." But it was happening. Someone had sold her home while she was gone. And the HOA was involved. Karen had declared that my sister had abandoned the property. She claimed there were unpaid fines, and the house had been seized by the HOA and sold to cover the debt. Except, that wasn't even legal. Not the way she did it. My sister had never received any final notices. She had no court hearing. No chance to defend herself. Just a crooked HOA board and one power-hungry woman making decisions behind closed doors. I could feel the anger rising in my chest as I stood there, watching strangers settle into a home that didn't belong to them. I told the new owners this was a mistake and that the house wasn't legally sold. They didn't want to hear it. And honestly, it wasn't their fault. They were just as shocked as we were. But I knew one thing, this wasn't over. Karen had crossed a line. A big one. And if she thought she could get away with it, she was dead wrong. I wasn't going to let this slide. Not after what she did to my sister. So I got to work. Karen wasn't just a bossy neighbor. She had turned the entire HOA into her personal playground. And the more we started digging, the more disturbing things we found. It turns out, this wasn't her first time pulling something shady. We found a few neighbors who had their own Karen stories. One elderly couple got fined every week for having a flag on their porch that wasn't approved. Another guy got threatened with foreclosure over a backyard shed that had been there since the house was built. But no one had ever pushed back too hard. They just paid the fines or made the changes because they didn't want trouble. Karen liked it that way. She thrived on control. That's when it became clear. Karen didn't just enforce the rules. She made them up when it suited her. And with most of the HOA board made up of her friends, no one ever challenged her. It was like a little dictatorship, dressed up in paperwork and community newsletters. I couldn't let my sister get steamrolled like that. So I started collecting every piece of paper she ever got from the HOA. Letters, fines, warnings, everything. I organized it all and made a timeline of events. And the more I looked, the more things didn't add up. For example, the HOA claimed that they'd sent 3 final notices before taking the house. But none of those letters existed. My sister had never received them. They weren't in her mail. They weren't emailed. And get this, the HOA couldn't even produce proof that they were sent. Just a typed-up list saying they had been. That's it. No certified mail receipts. No tracking numbers. Nothing. That was my first clue that something was really wrong. Then I pulled property records from the county office. That's when things got even weirder. The house had been transferred in some kind of emergency auction through the HOA. The buyer? A shell company. No real name listed. Just a generic LLC with an address linked to, you guessed it, Karen's cousin. She had literally funneled the sale through her own family to hide it. It was all starting to look like fraud. Serious fraud. And if she'd done it to my sister, who knows how many others she had targeted. I spoke to a lawyer. At first, he thought it would be hard to prove intent. But when I laid out the timeline, showed him the missing notices, the fake debt, and the shady sale, he leaned back in his chair and said, "This looks really bad for them. You might have a solid case." That gave me hope. But I knew it wasn't going to be easy. While the legal stuff was getting started, I kept talking to neighbors. I needed more proof that Karen had a pattern. And I found it. One woman showed me how Karen changed the HOA rules overnight to ban her from parking her RV in her driveway, after Karen's own friend complained about it. Another guy had video footage of Karen snooping through his backyard at night, supposedly checking for violations. She was out of control. People were scared to speak out, though. Karen had a way of making your life miserable if you crossed her. Random fines. Petty harassment. One neighbor even said their dog mysteriously disappeared after they argued with her. But now that someone was fighting back, they started to open up. I printed everything. Every message. Every photo. Every document that showed how Karen used her position to bully people, break rules, and even steal a home. And the more I gathered, the clearer it became, this wasn't just about my sister anymore. This was about stopping someone who had gotten away with way too much for way too long. Meanwhile, my sister was staying with me. She was stressed, angry, and confused. One moment she had a home, the next it was gone, without warning. But she was strong. And when she saw all the work I was doing, all the evidence we were collecting, something lit up in her. She was ready to fight. We both were. And Karen. She had no idea what was coming. We decided to hit back hard, and hit back smart. The first thing we did was file a formal complaint with the county. We provided every piece of evidence, fake fines, forged notices, the shady auction, and the connection to Karen's cousin's company. The investigator we spoke to sounded stunned. He said he'd seen bad HOAs before, but this was next level. But that was just the beginning. While the county looked into the illegal sale, our lawyer helped us file a lawsuit against the HOA for wrongful seizure of property and fraud. It was official. Karen was about to face legal heat, and for the first time, she wasn't in control. Still, we weren't taking any chances. We went public. I posted on a local community forum, laying out what had happened, just the facts. No exaggeration. Just a clear timeline of how Karen and her little HOA crew had stolen my sister's house while she was away. Within hours, the post blew up. People were outraged. Some even admitted they had been afraid to speak before, but now they felt like they had a voice. It was exactly what we needed. That's when something unexpected happened. A local news station reached out. They'd seen the post and wanted to do a story on HOA abuse. At first, we were hesitant. We didn't want to make things worse or draw the wrong kind of attention. But the more we thought about it, the more it made sense. If Karen could do this in the dark, she wouldn't stop. We had to shine a light on everything she'd done. We sat down for an interview, faces blurred, names changed, but the truth still came through. The story aired a few days later, And let me tell you, it lit the community on fire. The very next HOA meeting was packed. Usually, maybe 5 or 6 people would show up. This time, over 50. People were mad. And they weren't afraid anymore. They started asking questions Karen couldn't answer. Like how the HOA had the authority to seize a home without a court order. Or why the so-called auction had been kept secret from the rest of the neighborhood. Karen tried to keep control. She banged her little gavel, tried to cut people off, tried to spin the story. But it wasn't working. The more she talked, the worse she looked. People saw right through it. Someone brought up our case directly and demanded an explanation. Karen fumbled through her notes, said it was a routine enforcement and that my sister had abandoned the property. That was the lie she was sticking with. But the community wasn't buying it. One neighbor stood up and said, if she abandoned it, why was her brother checking in on the house every week? Why was her mail still being picked up? Why was there furniture inside? Karen had no answer. People started booing. Some even shouted for her to resign. It was chaos, but it was beautiful. After years of control, Karen was finally losing her grip. Meanwhile, the county investigation was heating up. Turns out, not only was the sale unlawful, but several documents had been altered. Signatures that didn't match. Forms backdated. Notices missing critical legal language. It wasn't just shady anymore, it was potentially criminal. And then came the best part. Our lawyer filed a motion to void the sale and return the property to my sister. Based on everything we'd submitted, the judge granted a temporary order blocking any further actions involving the house. That meant the so-called buyers couldn't move forward with anything, and soon, they'd be out. It wasn't over, not by a long shot. But things were turning around. Karen, who once walked around like she owned the neighborhood, now avoided eye contact with anyone. Her fake confidence had cracked. The house was still in limbo, but not for long. And once everything came to light, we had a feeling Karen's reign over the HOA wouldn't survive much longer either. The new owners were not happy. And honestly, I didn't blame them. They had no idea they were walking into a legal firestorm. They thought they'd scored a good deal from an HOA auction, only to find out the house still legally belonged to someone else. They tried to argue at first, saying they had a valid deed and the sale was final, but once the court order came in, they backed off quickly. They moved out within a week. I remember standing with my sister on the front lawn the day we got the keys back. She was holding a cardboard box with a few things she had grabbed from storage, but she wasn't smiling. Not yet. The windows were bare. The paint had been changed. Her garden was destroyed. The people who lived there for that short time hadn't exactly taken care of the place. It didn't feel like home anymore. Not yet. But it was a start. We walked through the rooms together. The floors were scratched. Her bedroom was empty. The kitchen still had someone else's magnets on the fridge. But she looked around like she was trying to recognize something. Like she was trying to find pieces of her life in the middle of someone else's mess. She said, "It's mine. That's all that matters." We spent the next few days helping her clean up, paint walls, and fix the yard. Little by little, she was reclaiming it. Not just the physical space, but the feeling of it. Every time she nailed a picture back on the wall or replaced a light bulb, it felt like taking something back from Karen. Like undoing a piece of what had been stolen. And while we were doing all of that, things weren't looking good for Karen. The HOA board started to crumble. After everything that came out in the news, after the neighbors finally saw her for who she really was, support disappeared. 3 members resigned. A group of residents started a petition to remove Karen as HOA president, and it got more than enough signatures in just a few days. When they handed it over during the next meeting, Karen didn't even look surprised. She just looked tired. Like she knew it was over. But the legal consequences were only beginning. The county filed charges for fraudulent transfer of property. The audit revealed years of shady behavior, unapproved fines, missing funds, and multiple cases where Karen had manipulated HOA rules to benefit people she knew. There was even a record of her waiving fines for her own family while hitting others with ridiculous penalties for tiny things. It wasn't just one bad decision. It was a pattern. Our lawsuit moved forward, 2. The court ruled in my sister's favor, confirming that the home had been taken illegally. She was awarded damages for emotional distress, legal fees, and loss of property. It didn't make up for the stress and the fear and the nights she spent wondering if she'd ever sleep in her own bed again, but it was something. And word spread fast. Other HOAs in the area started getting pressure to review their practices. One of the county commissioners even brought up the story in a public meeting, saying it was an example of why HOA powers needed to be better regulated. People were finally paying attention. But despite everything that happened, my sister stayed quiet through most of it. She never got loud. She never screamed. She never showed up at Karen's door demanding anything. She just stood her ground, stayed strong, and let the truth do the work. That's the part one respected most. Sometimes, when we'd take a break from fixing up the house, we'd sit on the front porch with iced tea, looking out at the street. Neighbors would walk by and wave, people we didn't even know before all of this. Some stopped to talk. A few thanked us for standing up to the HOA. One even said, "It's like the neighborhood finally got a fresh start." My sister would nod, quietly. Then she'd look around and say, "I just want peace." And that's what we were working on. One repaired door, one painted wall, one flower planted at a time. Peace didn't come overnight. Even with Karen out and the legal mess behind us, the damage she caused took time to fade. My sister didn't trust the HOA, or really anyone connected to it, for a long while. And honestly, I didn't blame her. After everything she'd been through, trusting people again wasn't going to be easy. But something started to shift in the neighborhood. People weren't walking on eggshells anymore. You could see it. Before, everyone was quiet, afraid to break some made-up rule. Now, people were out front more. Kids were riding bikes again. Neighbors talked to each other in driveways. It felt alive in a way it hadn't before. It was like the whole place had been under a cloud, and now, with Karen gone, the sun was finally coming through. A new HOA board was formed. This time, it wasn't packed with Karen's friends. It was a mix of real neighbors, people who actually lived there and cared about the community, not just about power. One of them, an older woman named Donna, came by to personally apologize to my sister. She said, "We should have spoken up sooner. I'm sorry for what happened. It won't happen again." My sister didn't say much in return, but I could tell she appreciated it. The new board even invited residents to help rewrite the HOA policies. They held open meetings, asked for feedback, and actually listened. Imagine that. A neighborhood organization that treated people like human beings. It was a strange and refreshing change. We still kept an eye on things, though. Trust, once broken, takes a long time to rebuild. Every letter from the HOA made my sister pause. Every knock on the door gave her a little jolt. It was like muscle memory, her brain still expecting another fight. But slowly, those reactions faded. Not all the way, not yet. But they softened. And Karen? Well, her life took a sharp turn. She lost her job. Turns out, her employer didn't appreciate being associated with someone accused of property fraud. Her family, the ones she pulled into this mess, stopped defending her publicly. And the community she once ruled. They shut her out completely. The last we heard, she moved out of state. No forwarding address. No goodbye. Just gone. I wish I could say I felt sorry for her. But I don't. Because she didn't just go after a house, she went after a person. A life. She used power to take what wasn't hers, and when she got caught, she never once apologized. Not even a fake one. And that says everything you need to know about her. But this story isn't really about her. It's about my sister, who kept going even when it felt like everything was ripped away from her. It's about the people who finally found the courage to speak up. It's about a neighborhood that stood together, not because it was easy, but because it was right. There were moments in the middle of all this when we didn't think we'd win. When we thought the house was gone for good. When the system felt too broken to fight. But you'd be surprised what one person, or two, or even a whole street full of people can do when they decide enough is enough. I remember one night in particular. My sister and I were sitting on the back patio, the one Karen once tried to fine her over for having improper lighting. We had strung up some new fairy lights and were just sitting there in the glow, not talking much. And she said, "I didn't think I'd ever feel safe here again. But I do now." Slowly. That stuck with me. Because it wasn't just about getting back a house, it was about getting back peace of mind. And that's harder to reclaim than any piece of property. We didn't just make Karen regret what she did. We showed her, and everyone like her, that power isn't a weapon you get to use on people without consequence. Not when the truth is on our side. And not when we're willing to stand up, together, and fight back. Not long after everything settled down, my sister found something unexpected tucked inside an old filing cabinet that had been pushed into a corner of the garage. One Karen never bothered to clear out when the house was sold. It was a box, taped up sloppily, stuffed with old HOA documents. At first, we figured it was just leftover junk. But as we started flipping through the papers, something strange stood out. Handwritten notes in the margins. Names. Phone numbers. Fines that weren't in the official records we had pulled earlier. There were mentions of watchlist neighbors and highlighted violations with little comments next to them like "push harder" and "target again next quarter." It was Karen's personal HOA hit list. And that's when we realized, this wasn't just some disorganized neighborhood oversight. Karen had been running a full-on operation. She kept tabs on people she didn't like, fined them over and over until they either paid or gave up. There were references to specific dates when she dropped by unannounced, and notations about whether certain residents gave her attitude. It was all there, in her own handwriting. We scanned everything and handed it straight over to the lawyer. He couldn't believe it. This wasn't just evidence of abuse of power, it was a potential civil rights violation. Especially if she'd been targeting residents based on personal bias, which it definitely looked like. The attorney asked if we wanted to pursue a broader lawsuit. A class action. We weren't sure. My sister had just gotten her house back. She was finally breathing again. But when we showed the documents to a few of the neighbors who had also been targeted, some who were elderly, one who barely spoke English, they were furious. One of them said, she thought she could break us one by one because we were alone. So we joined forces. By the end of that month, 6 households filed complaints. The story got picked up again, this time by a bigger news outlet. They came out, filmed interviews, even got statements from people who hadn't spoken before. Everyone had a Karen story. Some had been fined into submission. Others had lost parts of their yard or been told they couldn't renovate. One couple had paid thousands in made-up violations just to stop the harassment. And once the story aired again, the floodgates opened. More neighbors started showing up to the new HOA meetings. Some brought binders. Others came with photos and receipts. A few even had audio recordings of Karen threatening them or insulting them in public. It was surreal, like watching a neighborhood wake up from a long nightmare. But it wasn't just about venting or exposing what happened. People were taking action. The new board opened a formal inquiry into past HOA decisions, and a local lawyer volunteered pro bono hours to help victims file claims. One by one, Karen's little empire of fear crumbled. And that box my sister found? It turned out to be the key. In it was a file labeled House 11B, my sister's house. Inside was a breakdown of supposed violations, none of which were official. Things like unfriendly tone during phone call and yard appears unkempt, but verify with photos later. No proof. No paperwork. Just bias and control. There was even a note that said, "Maybe gone for work, good time to move fast." That line hit hard. Karen had planned it. She waited until my sister was out of town and used that opportunity to make her move. It wasn't just an HOA decision. It was premeditated. Calculated. Personal. The community didn't just turn against her, they started to rebuild from the inside out. They restructured the fine system. Set clear limits on board power. Put in protections for homeowners so no one could ever do what Karen did again. And slowly, people who had been scared to speak for years started to feel like they had a voice. My sister still has that box. It sits on a shelf in her office now, next to her legal papers and photos of the house being restored. Not because she wants to remember the worst of it, but because it's proof. Proof of what was done, what was overcome, and what it took to get justice. Even months later, the effects of what happened still echoed through the neighborhood. It was like a wound that had started healing, but the scar remained, a reminder that something real and painful had happened here. The new HOA board had made changes, and people were starting to trust again, but there was still this quiet tension every time someone brought up the past. Especially when Karen's name came up. One morning, while my sister was working in the front yard, planting some new flowers where Karen had once ordered her to remove non-compliant landscaping, a man pulled up in a car and stepped out. He was probably in his late 50s, wore a plain blue shirt, and looked like he didn't want to be there. He introduced himself as Karen's cousin. The same one who bought the house at that shady auction. At first, my sister froze. I watched from the porch, ready to step in. But the guy just raised his hands and said, "I didn't know. I swear. I didn't know what she was doing." He looked genuinely uncomfortable. Said he was sorry. Said that when he found out the sale was being challenged in court, he tried to back out, but Karen convinced him to stay quiet and let her handle it. He thought it was just a technical mistake, not something criminal. It didn't make anything better, but hearing it from him, hearing someone from Karen's own circle admit it, it felt like something finally cracked open. After he left, my sister just stood there for a minute. Then she knelt back down and kept planting her flowers. No dramatic reaction. No anger. Just moving forward. Around that same time, something surprising started happening. Other neighborhoods reached out. People from nearby communities, even ones a few towns over, had heard the story and wanted advice. They were dealing with their own Karens. HOAs that had too much power and no oversight. They wanted to know how we fought back, what steps we took, how we found the right people to help. It was like one story had opened a door for dozens of others. My sister ended up speaking on a local panel at a community reform meeting. She didn't really want to at first. Public speaking wasn't her thing, but I told her people needed to hear it from someone who lived it. Not a lawyer. Not a reporter. Just a regular person who got targeted and fought back. She did it. She stood there with a few notes in her hand and told a packed room how she almost lost her home and how she got it back. They gave her a standing ovation. After that, something in her changed. She wasn't just surviving anymore, she was leading. She helped write a guide for homeowners dealing with difficult HOAs. She started attending meetings for other neighborhoods. Not because she wanted revenge or to stay angry, but because she didn't want anyone else to feel as alone as she did when it first happened. Meanwhile, the civil case against Karen moved forward. It wasn't just about our house anymore. With the documents from that box and all the neighbors stepping forward, it turned into a full-scale legal disaster for her. Multiple charges. Multiple lawsuits. Her lawyer tried to delay things, but the court wasn't having it. One of the neighbors who had lived next to Karen for over a decade said, "I always knew she was strict. I didn't know she was dangerous." And she was. Not in a physical way, but in the way people with unchecked power can quietly ruin lives. She had created an environment where fear ruled, where people stopped questioning because it was easier to stay quiet. Until someone didn't stay quiet. Until someone pushed back. Every part of that journey, every document, every court date, every late-night phone call trying to figure out what to do next, led us to this place. A place where the neighborhood wasn't perfect, but it was free. Where my sister's house was hers again, inside and out. Where neighbors smiled when they passed each other, not out of politeness, but because they finally could. And through it all, my sister never tried to make herself the center of attention. She didn't brag. She didn't act like a hero. She just kept showing up, quietly rebuilding what had been broken, not just for herself, but for everyone else too.